My dad told me this story today over lunch, and it seemed completely appropriate with this subreddit. There are two things to know before I tell this story. These events took place in the 1970s, in a third world country where justice is obtained with one's own hand and family, for better or worse. My maternal family, on my grandmother's side, is known in her town for having outbursts of anger, the kind that blurs vision and turns everything red, and a strong temper. No one in my family embodied these qualities more infamously than my great-grandmother, Mama Delia. Mama Delia was an implacable woman, violent with her words and her fists as well. With Mama Delia, my grandmother, her siblings, and later my father's generation, making a mistake, no matter how small, Mama Delia was married to my great-grandfather, obviously a magistrate of the Supreme Court of Justice of my country, and, according to my father, a good man and highly respected by all. But the moment that he walked through the door of the house, his authority ended, and my great-grandmother's tyrannical rule began. Nothing was done or undone without her will, and as you can imagine, my grandmother and her siblings resented her greatly. Mama Delia has been dead for 40 years now, but stories of her are still told at all family gatherings. They also say that everyone in my family, my grandmother, who if you knew her you would say I'm lying, she is a sweetheart, and her children inherited her choleric gene that comes out from time to time in an explosive and memorable way. My great-grandparents had 4 sons, but only one is relevant in this story. Jose, not his real name. Jose was the second and the most rebellious of them all, the one who could not stand Mama Delia's mistreatment, and he let her know it all the time. He was the only one who stood up to her, and consequently the one who suffered the most. It was when Jose turned 15 that he decided never again to let himself be mistreated or abused by her. And of course, Mama Delia had something to say about it. I don't know exactly the details, but something my uncle did that upset her deeply. Years before, Mama Delia would have responded with leashes and screaming, but since my uncle was already 15, he was taller and stronger than her mother. She had to resort to an alternative tactic. She decided to call a policeman to the house. And what was her instructions to the policeman? To give my uncle the beating of his life. That was the last day my great-uncle lived at his parents' house. But where I come from, family is the most important thing, impossible to escape. 4 years later, my great-grandparents had moved to their new house in another part of town. Next to them lived the Cordobes, the parents, normal people, but the son, Ruben, was another story. Ruben was about 25 years old. Ruben did not study, nor did he work or helped with household chores. I don't know for a fact, but I can imagine his time and energy on 2 things. Growing his muscle mass until he looked like an Andean Arnold Schwarzenegger, and insulting my grandparents every time he saw them walking down the street. My dad couldn't tell me why. Maybe Ruben was just like that, or maybe Mama Delia said or did something to him at some point. I wouldn't be surprised. What he did tell me was that Ruben's aggressiveness towards my great-grandparents was so extreme that he wouldn't even let them walk on his side of the sidewalk, claiming it was his. My great-grandparents never did anything about it. My great-grandfather had his first child at 46 and my grandmother at 36, so they were already old by then, and for some mysterious reason, they never told anyone what was going on with Ruben either. This is where Jose comes in again. His relationship with his mother was strained and conflicted, which did not stop him from visiting them every so often to see his father and his 3 siblings. That day, my great-grandparents were returning home, and of course Ruben's shouts, insults, and obscene rudeness were there to accompany them as they opened the door to their house. What he didn't count on was that Jose was arriving at the same moment and heard everything. The world went first black, and then red. Like a worthy son of Mama Delia, Jose exploded. He lunged at Ruben 3 times, all 3 times with a blow to the face. Ruben knocked him effortlessly to the ground. Faced with such a beast, anyone else would have abandoned the fight. Jose did not. Jose was used to the pain, the blood, and the bruises that remained weeks later. Jose had lost his fear of confrontation years ago. Jose stood up one last time, under Ruben's insults and taunts, and charged him. I don't know how he did it. Perhaps Ruben had let his guard down, but he managed to land a kick on his opponent's shin. Ruben did not fall to the ground completely, but he was destabilized. Ruben did not know it, but he had already lost. My great-uncle climbed on his back, as if riding a mad bull at a fair, grabbed him by the head and slammed him repeatedly against the pavement. The smashed face, the teeth scattered on the ground, and the torrent of blood were not enough for Jose. What he did next was to grab Ruben by the hair and drag him up and down the street twice, until my older great-uncle stopped. The story ends with Ruben in the hospital, his face unrecognizable and deformed, and my uncle disappearing for a week to avoid any kind of retaliation. Never again did my great-grandparents have problems with Ruben, although Josie's relationship with Mama Delia never improved despite what happened.